In the beginning, we should have seen the Chinese drive for economic growth and their turning to America as a strategy. Instead, it looks like at the time it was thought of as an auxiliary event compared to the geopolitics of balancing the Soviet Union. Looking back, we can see the Chinese interest in technology transfer, sending students to America, a whole series of actions that grew and were never opposed by the American side. So where we find ourselves today, I mean literally today, the Chinese ambassador here in Washington has published an op-ed piece this morning. He reviews the various allegations, both from Congress and from the Trump administration, about illegal technology transfer, espionage. The latest White House report lists 50 of these practices. According to Ambassador Cui this morning, this is all false. China has engaged in nothing like this. He denies everything. There have been 2 or 3 articles in the last few days in the Chinese press going over specific allegations and denying them. He says anyone familiar with Chinese history knows the pressure doesn't work. Trade bullying will only backfire. Where this leaves us is that it's going to be very difficult to negotiate an end to these Chinese practices in light of what they have gotten away with over the last 40 years. As early as 2000, the FBI was sounding the alarm. An institution was created to try and track Chinese illegal technology acquisitions or industrial espionage. There was a strengthening of the FBI's offices in California where this tended to occur, and there were an increasing number of prosecutions. But from the Chinese point of view, this is only recently that they've been called on this conduct. A second theme has been our misunderstanding of the Chinese belief that they deserve to be number 1 in the world. There's a quotation, a 1955 statement by Chairman Mao, that China's destiny and China's historical contribution to all mankind will be to replace the United States of America as the number 1 economic power in the world. A number of Chinese economists have backed this up. Over the last few years, there's been 2 famous books in China. One is written by a very high-ranking Chinese who has a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago. He became the chief economist of the World Bank. His forecast is that China will be double the American economy in about 10 years, and it will be triple by 2049. The other book by a Chinese economist named Huan Gao has a similar projection. In other words, the China dream, not to be spoken aloud so the Americans can remain asleep, one Chinese general told me, but the Chinese dream is to surpass us where they see a period of what they call danger. The dangerous period is as the Americans begin to wake up and realize that they're going to be number 2, they might take what the Chinese call reckless action. That's the phase I think we're in today. Slowly, as the Americans begin to realize that they're only half of the Chinese economy, the Americans will come around and accommodate to reality. This is how I understand Ambassador Cui's op-ed piece this morning to be, that they're going to deny this. They have opened the door slightly. Yes, China might buy more American exports. They've offered as much as $60 or $70 billion increase next year, but that had a condition to it. It was an offer only active if the Americans put no tariffs at all on Chinese products. Please don't underestimate what we're dealing with. The kind of feistiness you can see over the last 2 months in the Chinese media, they're almost spoiling for a fight. They claim that they will set up an institution that will take the taxes they get from the tariffs on American products and use those to compensate Chinese companies. So we're dealing with a very good negotiating opponent.
I'm pleased to be with you today to share my understanding of China's systematic plan to transfer technology. In 2016, I co-authored a report on Chinese investments in venture-backed startup companies. We found that Chinese firms participated in a record 16% of all venture deals in 2015 and remained at 10% in 2016 and 11% in the first 10 months of 2017. This is concerning for several reasons. First, the growth of these investments is up substantially from a level of 1 to 6% in the period 2010 to 2014. Second, the technologies where Chinese firms are investing are the same as where U.S. venture capital firms are investing: artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, augmented reality, blockchain, genetic engineering, et cetera. Third, since venture investing depends on deal flow, investors see many more deals than they invest in. As a result, it's likely that Chinese investors in aggregate have seen upwards to 1/3 to 1/2 of recent U.S. venture financings. So they have a broad view of innovation across a range of technologies. Therefore, it's both logical and probable that China uses this broad view of U.S. innovation as a vantage point from which to target specific technologies, the underlying IP and know-how, as well as the key talent developing them. Once targeted, China can deploy one of 10 different technology transfer mechanisms, both legal and illegal, to bring this technology to China. Fourth, by investing in early-stage technology companies, Chinese investors are learning about these technologies at the same time and at the same rate that we do, which precludes any time-based advantage for U.S. industry or the U.S. military. Fifth, before the proposed FIRMA legislation, there was no monitoring, reporting, or control of investments in technologies important for national security. And lastly, the Defense Department will tend to avoid contact with early-stage technology companies that have a significant level of foreign ownership, even if the companies developing technology important for national security. Chinese venture investing is just part of a larger story of technology transfer to China, ongoing for decades through both legal and illegal means, including industrial espionage, cyber theft, forced joint ventures in exchange for access to the Chinese market, tracking of open source innovations, sponsoring professional organizations to target talent, and using Chinese foreign national students by placing them to work in sensitive areas of U.S. research. Viewed individually, the legal practices may seem benign, but when viewed in combination and at the scale China is employing them, the composite picture illustrates the intent, design, and dedication of a regime focused on technology transfer at a massive scale. Two specific examples of IP theft: American Superconductor, a wind turbine company whose software control code was stolen by Sinovel through Cold War-type industrial espionage, and Duke University example, where a Chinese foreign student stole research sponsored by the U.S. Air Force, started a successful company in China now selling to the PLA. Today, 1/3 of all foreign students in the U.S. are Chinese, and 25% of our STEM graduate students are Chinese foreign nationals. Some have access to research funded by the U.S. military and work in our national laboratories, as enforcement of restrictions varies at universities, but in general, the academic environment in the U.S. is open. We have the worst of both worlds with large numbers of Chinese foreign nationals. We allocate a large number of our limited capacity to Chinese students, and our immigration policy today turns them away once they've graduated. In a study released a year ago, the Commission on the Theft of American Intellectual Property said the annual losses from IP theft range from about $225 to $600 billion. This wide range indicates we do not have our arms around the problem, except to say that the scale is massive. The U.S. government does not have a holistic view of how fast this technology transfer is occurring, the level of Chinese investment in U.S. technology, or what technologies we should be protecting. The U.S. needs a sense of urgency in developing 4 remedies. First, better defensive tools such as the CFIUS reforms included in FIRMA and expanded and updated export controls. Second, more aggressive investment of IP theft with sanctions on Chinese firms that steal, such as ZTE, and changing our laws so that Chinese firms can be successfully sued in U.S. courts, along with the ability to attach their assets if found guilty. Third, increased FBI counterintelligence resources with a change of objectives to prevent the IP theft rather than prosecuting cases. And fourth, a long-term game plan to be successful in the technology race we now find ourselves in with China. Let me conclude with 2 important points. First, any of the steps we take to deter technology transfer from China, which includes CFIUS reforms and changes to export controls, needs to be coordinated closely with allies to be effective. Otherwise, we simply create an incentive for talent and companies to move offshore. Second, while defensive measures like CFIUS reform and better export controls are important, they are not key to winning a technology race with China. Winning that technology race means we must invest in science and technology, ensure Americans pursue STEM education, and increase federally funded R&D. To enable the U.S. to win the last technology race with the Soviet Union, federally funded R&D was 2% of GDP in the 1960s. U.S. federally funded R&D has declined today to 0.7% of GDP. We must improve our technology base and innovation capability.